Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
I still think twice now whenever I go outside.
A local professor accuses police of racial profiling, but officers deny the claim. Also,
they just told me that they're at capacity and we have to go to another site.
COVID testing backlog.
You're 20 minutes out right now from the test itself.
Why are so many people being turned away? And
the different lands that we go to, we also learn a bit of Indigenous history.
Teaching teens to build bike trails and deeper connections to nature.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
good evening. Thanks for joining us. A new Westminster professor, says he was racially profiled by police who stopped him on the street. But police say it was simply a case of mistaken identity.
As Andrea Ross reports, the man reported the incident because he believes the situation could have become dangerous.
New rules for returning travelers.
It is mandatory for those coming back to British Columbia.
The consequences at the border if you don't have a plan for self-isolation.
Tributes pour in for BC's youngest COVID victim.
He's not answering my phone calls or texts, and I said, oh Lord, please don't tell me.
His widow makes an emotional appeal on behalf of their 4-year-old daughter.
And COVID hospitalizations drop again.
We need to stay home this weekend. We need to be close to our families.
The strong appeal to stay put as we approach the long weekend.
You're watching Global BC. This is Global News Hour at 6.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. Encouraging new numbers in the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah, we upset. Let's do this another way.
George Floyd's brother calling for peace after a week of protests and sometimes violent unrest. But is a crackdown coming? Donald Trump lashing out at state leaders.
If you don't dominate, you're wasting your time.
Landed on the ground and the driver just kept going.
He was struck by a car while riding his bike in Vancouver, and the driver took off. Just ahead, we speak with the cyclist who's looking for your help in finding the person who was behind the wheel.
It's new, it's going to be different, and the best way I could describe the energy in the building right now is curious.
Schools have reopened across BC with new guidelines now in place. But how busy will the schools actually be? Just over 20% of the students here at Edith McDermott Elementary in Pitt Meadows are returning to class this week.
Nous sommes le samedi 18 avril et en direct de Vancouver, voici le téléjournal Colombie-Britannique. Avec une stabilisation timide des données dans la province, on pourra probablement bientôt reprendre certaines activités, mais le retour à la vie normale pourrait prendre encore 1 an. Des vedettes canadiennes organisent une cueillette d'articles sanitaires et de protection pour soutenir les travailleurs au front de la lutte au coronavirus.
Cette masque-là peut sauver une vie d'une infirmière, d'un policier ou d'un médecin.
La forêt brûle toujours près de Squamish. L'incendie qui a détruit plus de 200 hectares est contenu à environ 35 %, mais il est toujours considéré hors de contrôle. Bonsoir, mesdames, messieurs. Bon samedi. On débute donc avec les chiffres du jour en ce qui a trait à la COVID-19. Alors, lors du point de presse ce midi.
This is why we want to identify the attacker so we can rule anything out and find out if this is a hate crime.
Troubling video of a random attack. A young Asian woman in downtown Vancouver suddenly punched in the face. Also ahead.
I think the children are happy. I think they're responding very well to it.
Some kids are in the classroom for the first time. CTV gets a look at what the future could look like when all schools reopen, as the number of new COVID cases shrinks.
We'll be employing essentially the same standards of protection that people would get in hospitals as well.
And filling a cavity in the time of COVID-19, how the pandemic is changing a visit to the dentist.
This is CTV News.
An attack that appears to be racially motivated. A man punches a woman of Asian descent right in the face at a Vancouver bus stop. This apparently unprovoked assault luckily did not injure that woman. But it is just one of several similar attacks taking place in BC during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Good evening. Vancouver police can't say for sure what motivated that man to walk up to a woman he apparently has never met and attack her. But anti-Asian hate is a definite possibility.
CTV's David Molko reports on a crime that comes during a wave of pandemic-fueled racism and the hope that somebody recognizes that attacker.
Tonight on Check News.
Tragedy on the mountain.
There's no getting around.
Grief after the death of a well-known Vancouver Island businessman. On strike.
We'll be on strike one day longer than they'll be able to take it.
Western Forest Products workers vow to stay off the job as long as it takes. We'll tell you what they want. And the day after.
Perhaps the police were able to see a little bit more into the crowd.
This year's Canada Day police numbers may surprise you.
Live from Vancouver Island, here's Tess Van Stratton.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. It was a tragedy that shook the community of Port Alberni to its core. And this morning, the judge read out his verdict in the trial of a father charged with manslaughter in the death of his 2-month-old daughter, finding him not guilty.
CTV News at 5 with Jordan Cunningham.
Today marks a key transition in our BC pandemic. Phase 2 is here, and with it, the freedom to participate in renewal.
We would not be easing these restrictions if we did not feel we could do so safely.
A major milestone in BC's fight against COVID-19. Restaurants and hair salons begin to reopen, plus the province records its lowest number of new cases since early March. Good evening. Jordan is off tonight. I'm Amber Schinkel. Thank you for joining us. After 2 months of extreme measures to stop the spread of the coronavirus, today was one many have been anxiously waiting for. Personal services like barbers and hair salons are reopening, and you can now go enjoy a meal or a pint on a patio. But as CTV's Rob Buffum reports, it's not entirely business as usual.
I'm Shelby Tom. The tourism and hospitality sector is being hit hard here in Esseus, and now Destination Esseus is asking the town for some financial relief. I'll have that story coming up.
A Kelowna police officer has been forced off the job and temporarily into isolation after a suspect allegedly spat on him during an arrest. We'll have more on what the law says about spitting and assault coming up on Global Okanagan.
I'm Travis Lowe at Bear Creek Park, which is, like all other BC provincial parks, now closed until further notice. That story is coming up on Global News.
You're watching Global Okanagan. This is Global News.
Good evening and thank you for joining us tonight. A Kelowna RCMP officer is in isolation after allegedly being spat at by a suspect, and the accused is now facing a very serious charge.
Reporter Megan Turcato has more on how the law treats spitting and coughing and when it's considered assault.
Tonight, Arts Rally, turning out in support of a performing arts centre.
It means very little for taxation in our city. In fact, most people will not notice the difference at all in their taxes.
Lessons learned, valuable experience for BC Wildfire Service members.
Their fire season was the equivalent of basically 2 of our major fire seasons at the time.
And Vibe success, another provincial championship tournament awaits.
I actually haven't got to experience winning provincials yet, so I think a lot of us new girls really would like to experience that.
On air and online, this is the CFJC Evening News with Bill O'Donovan.
Good evening. Supporters in favor of building a new Centre for the Arts in downtown Kamloops rallied today to start their Vote Yes campaign. The Kamloops Centre for the Arts Society is using this month to garner support ahead of the April 4th referendum. As Delana Nisha tells us, society members are planning to up the ante in hopes of convincing Kamloops to approve the new arts centre.
All
29 students were evacuated to the Willow River Church.
Tonight on the CKPG News, scare on the tracks. A frightening morning for Giscombe residents as a CN train derailed down the street from the elementary school.
Implementation does mean the healing of the land, the water.
Rio and the river. After decades of bad blood along the Nechako, Rio Tinto has struck a deal to begin the healing process.
Even though it was a tough year, we raised about $4,000 more dollars this year at the CAC than we did last year.
And Canfor contributions. Despite a difficult year at the forestry company, employees continue to raise money for a worthy cause.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. Giscombe Elementary School is a rural spot housing about 30 students and staff. The school, along with the rest of the small community about 40 kilometers northeast of Prince George, had quite the day as a train derailed this morning, forcing students and staff to evacuate the school just down the road from the railroad crossing. Approximately 20 rail cars came off the tracks, though, as Dave Branco found out, the school principal and the students were surprised at the lack of commotion.